It's tragic, really. We all have a story. A dark secret wrapped in emptiness and regret. You know. The Toll. I'm Nancy Simpson. The town we start off in is tucked away in the Ozark Mountains on the Missouri side, Ava. As you go outside the heart of that small town, it becomes sparse, quick. Hills, trees, and dirt roads that lead to who knows where. Anywhere you go around those parts, well, it's secluded. And that's the case for the Eagles Lodge, the scene of a murder there in that small town. The building sits in a bit of a clearing, but is surrounded by a forest and darkness. Real darkness at night. Any other time after that abduction and murder? Well, it's another darkness that's measured by how you feel, not by what you see with your eyes. A man who people trusted, who appeared to be a helper by day and a serial killer by night. A man who was known as quiet, who kept to himself and tended to those who were wounded. Yeah, that guy. And one woman held on to his secret for years. How much did she really know? Why didn't she come forward? What other victims are out there? Killer unknown. Answers vanish just like the woman working at the Eagles Lodge. And that's where this story starts. The Toll. Unsettled. It's the middle of March 2007, the 13th to be exact, a Tuesday night. Rene Williams was a bartender at the Eagles Lodge along Highway 14 in Ava, Missouri. It's a small, rural town, population a little over 2,000. Rene put away the night's receipts, tucked them into a safe, called her boyfriend of 13 years to let him know that she was on her way home, locked up the building, and vanished. Christopher Revak, now labeled a serial killer by many, was there that night. He lived in that Ava area and was an EMT for a nearby county and had worked as a volunteer firefighter. People described him as well-liked, reliable, mean, vicious, deadly. Those words didn't come to mind when you asked people who casually knew Christopher Revak. That was 2007. Chris DeGase was elected into the sheriff's seat in January 2009, so 2 years later. One of his campaign promises was to solve this case. What happened to Rene Williams? Remember, DeGase inherited this case, so everything he talks about prior to 2009, he's read from case files. That's important to remember.
They kind of viewed it as maybe she had left with friends or someone from the bar. Then the next day when she didn't show up and her family couldn't locate her, then I think that's when they really began digging into it. There was some evidence found at the scene there. There was some blood on the concrete. Then they began interviewing the patrons that had been at the establishment. It is a private establishment that people are required to log in when they come, sign in. So they started going through that, talking to people that had been at the bar to try and determine who was at the bar that night.
And pretty early on, it seems like Revak was on a short list.
You know, he was. I mean, as I went back and looked through it, they were on the right track in the very beginning. His name had came up. He was a person of interest, and they actually had a deputy go to his house shortly thereafter and interviewed him. He had an injury to his hand. He stated he'd slammed his hand in the door. And then for whatever reason, the investigation with him just kind of died right there.
DeGase started going through the thick case files. This disappearance now 2 years old.
I went back through the reports, started reading all the reports. I looked and seen what we had, what may have been overlooked. And actually, in the very beginning, they had seized his vehicle, and they were able to find some blood in the vehicle that did come back, and it did test positive for Rene Williams' blood. I believe the blood at the scene ended up testing back to Chris Revak's.
Was that initially, with the initial investigation?
Yes, absolutely.
So when you opened the books, you saw that this was his blood, this was her blood.
Yeah, absolutely. And her blood's in his vehicle. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I was kind of baffled why things, and I still don't know to this day kind of why things had stalled out at that point. I think really the reason was because they didn't have a body. They didn't have a body. The old adage that if you don't have a body, you don't have a murder, and that's just not true. I think that's kind of why it died out in the beginning. So I didn't have the body of Rene Williams.
So DeGaze thought this is where he needed to start. There was too much evidence pointing straight at Revak right off the bat. Blood evidence placing an injured Rene with an injured Chris Revak.
There's no doubt that Chris Revak was a person of interest in this. He was there, heard DNA's in his vehicle. So I started doing a little digging on him and seeing what I could find on him. And as I ran his background information, I'd seen that he was from the Wisconsin Rapids area. There was an area in Ohio that he was from. So I started, honestly, I did a Google search, women abducted from bars in Wisconsin Rapids. And when I did that, I popped up a story of Deidre Harm in Wisconsin Rapids. And as I opened up and flipped through that report, lo and behold, there was a composite drawing of Chris Revak.
When you looked at that picture, you saw him?
Yes, absolutely. I knew it was him, without a doubt. As soon as I looked at it, I knew it was him. At that point, I probably jumped the gun a little bit. I called Wisconsin Rapids, said, hey, I think I know who your guy is. Immediately, they were wanting to come down and do an interview with him. I'm like, hey, I still have a case here. I'm trying to wrap up on him. And they asked me, they said, can you place him in Wisconsin Rapids during the time of Deidre Harm's disappearance and abduction? So what I did is I went back and I contacted his employer and I got employee records, and lo and behold, he was on vacation in Wisconsin Rapids at the time Deidre Harm was abducted and murdered.
Yeah, Deidre Harm, June 2006. A young mom out for a night of fun in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, where Chris Revak grew up and was visiting during that time frame. The Investigation Discovery Channel did a piece on Revak and these two women a couple of years ago. It's called Last Call in the Dead of Night series. We'll have the link to that show on our website, thetollpodcast.com. Anyway, they spoke with a retired officer who investigated Deidre's case in Wisconsin. He talks about being at the same bar where she was having fun. He was celebrating with some other patrolmen. They remembered seeing Deidre there that night. She was having a good time with a friend who told officers when he left the bar, Deidre was talking to a man, and other witnesses described the same man. The next day, she didn't pick up her baby. A sketch was eventually made of this mystery man. While watching Last Call, you learn 3 months after Deidre's disappearance in Wisconsin, her mom finds a letter in her mailbox. It says something like, "I'm so sorry about Deidre. I didn't mean to." Childlike handwriting, cryptic message. She turns it over to police, but no prints and no new leads. Remains were found by some hunters 6 months later. They were confirmed to belong to Deidre Harm on November 21st, my birthday. To this day, Deidre's sweet friends keep a Facebook page. It's called We Will Never Forget Deidre Harm. Back in the Ozarks in Ava, Missouri, Sheriff Chris DeGaze says as he cracked open the case files and started digging into Rene Williams' disappearance, like he said, he literally Googled women abducted in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. And boom, Deidre Harm. The sheriff here in the Ozarks has no doubt Christopher Revak was Deidre's killer in Wisconsin.
Now, authorities can't completely close that case, but they're
Correct.
pretty sure.
Yeah. And different agencies have different policies and procedures as far as being able to close out a case. But, I think when you look at the totality of circumstances and you look at the fact that, one, he was in the bar that night. He was in Wisconsin Rapids. We were able to prove he was in Wisconsin Rapids through his work records. We were able to prove that he ended up staying later in Wisconsin Rapids, called into work, and said he needed a couple more days to stay. An emergency had came up. And then, of course, the interviews that they did there in Wisconsin Rapids, there's no doubt in my mind. When you look at the composite drawing of the people of him that they said she was with in the bar that night, absolutely no doubt.
You said you took one look.
One look.
That was it.
That was it.
Sheriff DeGaze says he also has no doubt Revak was a serial killer.
My concern with it is, and in the position that he had, is that I don't believe that Deidre and Rene are his only two victims. He's in a position where he comes in contact with a lot of women. Many times on that ambulance, whether they're a victim of domestic violence or an assault, sometimes very vulnerable women. And I don't believe that these were his first two victims. And I had reached out to several other agencies and advised them of our findings here. There was a news reporter that was abducted during that time. I provided those agencies that information. I don't think anything ever came of them, but I just can't believe that he's in a position of contacting people, particularly females, and then obtaining their trust. As a paramedic, if he was to provide aid to a female, I would think that if he went back, they wouldn't be alarmed at all if he was to walk back to say he was checking on him or something. I don't know. I have no proof of that. That's just my speculation.
The sheriff is referring to Jody Husentrut, the news reporter in Iowa who went missing in the early hours of June 1995. She told a fellow colleague she was on her way but never arrived. There were signs of a struggle outside her apartment, but no real clues. It remains unsolved. And there were many others that fit this M.O.
And then I would just reach out to that agency and provide them with the information that I had and see if his name had even came up in it. And of course, we're talking several years back, and a lot of those agencies, some of them couldn't find the records. Some of them were, we know who done that, but it wasn't him. But we haven't made an arrest yet. So basically, I just tried to reach out to them and share the information that I had.
At the time of Revak's arrest, local media brought up another woman, Crystal Ahrensdorf, last seen around closing time at a bar in 2001, also in Iowa, a state where Revak's ex-wife once lived. Douglas County Sheriff DeGay says he knew Chris Revak, would say hello to him if he passed him on the sidewalk, but had never worked with him directly. DeGay says he did know and was friends with Chris Revak's wife, Johanna. She was an EMT at the time of Chris's arrest, but in the past, at the time of Rene's abduction 2 years earlier, she had worked as a 911 dispatcher for the Ava Police Department. Kevin Tweedy is the team commander for the Missouri Disaster Response System and Missouri's Medical Fatality Management. A huge tornado, a terrorist attack, the state calls Kevin and his team to help overwhelmed hospitals. They even help on the medical side with huge stadium concerts. Now, back in 2007, when Rene Williams went missing from the Eagles Lodge in Ava, Kevin Tweedy was the director for the Taney County Ambulance District in southwest Missouri, a county over from where Rene was taken. Kevin knew Chris Revak. Kevin was his boss. Kevin says Chris kept to himself.
Chris was just a very quiet individual. We never really had any trouble with him. He was a good EMT for us as far as that. He always requested to work in the Forsyth station, which was a rural outlying station, which was just away from people more. And so he could do 24-hour shifts there. So he'd come in and do a 24-hour shift, and he could be off for several days. He was an EMT, did a good job that he never really seemed to want to go anywhere else, like become a medic or anything. He was content on being an EMT. And his partners never had any problems with him. They just said he was always quiet to himself pretty much. At the station, you'd have 24 hours with him. He would just kind of be to himself, per se. He just wasn't a chatty bunny like everybody else, intermingling. He just kind of did his own thing. I know with us, when he would come over and do training, or I would go to the stations and work with him, usually he'd be opposite of where they were upstairs. And I think that's why he liked it, because he could separate himself from, versus coming over to the main station or one of the other stations. They only had one location where you had to hang out in one area. Up there, it was just kind of unique because you had an upstairs and downstairs. It had sleeping upstairs and sleeping downstairs. So you could totally be separated from the other person, except on a call, or when you're going to get food or something. You really didn't have to intermingle with them too much. I think the only trouble we got is we went into a no smoking policy, and he was a smoker. And I think we had to talk to him about that a few times, because just stuff. But as far as his work habit, he did it, and he wasn't like crazy good. He just did his job, come in, did it, and left.
Kevin, the former boss, says there was only really one comment that might have tipped somebody off, but still, you don't suspect murder.
I know his partner, which is Becky, and Becky's not around anymore, but she just said, before we knew he was arrested and stuff, that he was just really creepy. And that's what she goes, he's just been real creepy lately. And I'm like, what's creepy? And she goes, I don't know how to describe it. He's just been really creepy. He just kind of got a cold look, and he just doesn't talk at all. And she goes, it's just creepy. And Because they would, in Forsyth at that station there, they're by themselves. So it was him and his main partner was Becky at the time, and it was a female. And she just felt, several months there, I just remember she just said he just creepy, and that, I can't get rid of a guy because he's creepy. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't saying anything. She just had a weird vibe about it.
For reference, Forsyth, which is right next to Branson, Missouri, is 31 miles from Ava going northeast. It's 2-lane, a hilly, curvy, secluded drive, parts of it through the Mark Twain National Forest. Can I make it sound any more desolate? It's just really country. Looking back now, the only thing that was different during that time frame that Kevin can remember was that Chris and his wife Johanna, who also worked for the ambulance district, now an EMT, took quite a bit of time off.
He took off and went out of state with his wife a couple times, and used all of his sick and vacation time, if I remember right. And outside of before that, he didn't seem to do a lot of that,
Johanna had a secret she kept for nearly 2 years. Once Sheriff DeGase was elected into office in 2009, his mission was to solve Rene's case, knowing full well Chris Revak was the main suspect.
I kind of looked at things and felt that the person that I needed to speak to probably the most was his wife. I felt that, with her being married to him, she had to have some information. And I tried to call and speak with her, and he intercepted the phone call. And I think that kind of put him on the defensive a little bit. Anyway, we figured out a way to get her out of the house and get her to another location where I was able to talk to her and begin interviewing her. And speaking with her, of course, she was terrified. And the question came up was, why didn't you come forward with any information with the previous sheriff? And she said she had very little faith in the previous sheriff to keep her protected. And
but she did believe that she was living with somebody who could have murdered.
Absolutely. She knew she was. Shortly after the deputy had interviewed Chris Revak at his residence, I believe it was the next day, Chris Revak forced Johanna to come to a location on the property where he forced her to actually help him load the body of Rene Williams in a vehicle. So she knew she was living with a murderer. He told her that not only if she said anything, that not only would she end up like that, but her mom and her sister would end up like that. And
so for 2 years she's living with him,
mm-hmm.
Scared to death.
Absolutely terrified. And when I was running for office, I seen her on the streets, and I shook hands with her, and she said something to me. She looked at me and she says, "I hope you win." And it was just kind of odd the way that she said it. And so I kind of felt that, that at some point during this investigation, I'd be able to form a connection with her to hopefully help extract the information from her. And she did. She spoke with us. She gave disclosure about what she knew, things that he had told her.
And it led Sheriff DeGase to some property more than an hour north of Ava.
She was able to give a very descriptive location that where Chris had indicated he had buried Rene, and described that area to me the night that I talked to her mom and her sisters. And we left. Midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, we left, and we were headed to this area that's about an hour and a half from here. And of course, we had people watching the residence and everything that Chris was at. I mean, we traveled to this area, located everything just as she had described, and for days, myself and the Highway Patrol, numerous cadaver dog teams, we tore that place apart. And most of it was digging. The information that we had is that he had buried her there. We ran cadavers, we searched the property, we grid searched, we dug lagoons out. It was an old farm that had a house, previously had a house on it. And we were unable to find any of Rene's remains. But with the area that we were in, there's no doubt that with the description that Johanna knew that, because he had taken her there. He had taken her, said, this is where I buried Rene, on this property. To me, it was very powerful. We spent days and weeks there looking at this place. With her statement, we were able to get a warrant for his arrest for murder. As I was in Polk County, my deputies took him into custody. I came back. I gave him his warrant, advising he was under arrest for a murder. I didn't tell him what murder, intentionally. He said he wanted his lawyer, so.
And so that was the end of questioning. I asked Kevin Tweedy, head of the ambulance district at the time where Chris Revak and his wife worked, about Johanna.
Then they started diving in more to his wife. What has she worked? How much did she take off? Did they work together? Has she been acting odd? And his wife, which was odd, his wife was supposed to be like a black belt in karate, and she was a bigger gal, not big as in real big, but if she grabbed a hold of you, you'd probably know it. And Chris was a smaller guy, so we always are like, we know who wears pants in that family because she'd kick his butt, and she was, I think she used to be in the military, so she just had that vibe about her, just being kind of a gruff person anyway. She was good EMT too. If you would see them together or when they were together and stuff, like she was the dominant one and he wasn't.
Kevin, being a suspected killer's boss, he talks about the first realization that Chris Revak could have murdered another woman in Wisconsin.
I think that probably creeped us out more than anything because we knew he had taken trips out of town several times. I don't remember how I think he told us, that he'd go, or his wife. I think it was his wife more than him because he never would say anything, but she'd say, we're going up here to see family, or we're going up there. I think, if I remember right, his family or her family, one lived out of state, so they seemed to be always going over there. And then, so yeah, that was real weird for us to find out, oh my gosh, and, he might have been on his time off going to do that, and then he'd come back to work, and, he could just come back and not be real different. Like I said, he was quiet. He wasn't any quieter. He wasn't doing anything else, but he'd show up to work and, not like he was out front pacing back and forth or seemed like he's worried about anything. He'd watch TV and do normal stuff. So you're like, wow, how could you have that on your mind, and then just come back. And I think anybody else they'd be a nervous wreck, always looking over his shoulder, thinking something, but didn't seem to bother him a bit. And he had to interact with law enforcement all the time. So it was weird.
Rene was with Tim Brooke for 13 years, and as I've said, the couple had 2 children together, raising 3 children. I reached out to Tim for this project. He was nice to me on the phone, but said he'd have to think about it. He asked me if I'd seen the investigation discovery piece, and I told them that I had. That was hard for him to do, of course. He was crying as they filmed, saying how much he missed her, talking about searching for her. And he did not call me back for this interview. I understand. I picked this story because of Tim. I was working on a weekend. Tim came to the radio station, KTTS in Springfield, Missouri, where I worked as a news reporter to drop off a flyer. This would have been an hour and 20-minute drive from Ava. KTTS is a heritage radio station known for news, weather, traffic reports, and country music. I remember meeting him at the front door, him handing me the flyer and begging me to get the story out on the radio. He looked sad and so tired as he told me that she had 3 kids she would never leave. He was sure she was in trouble, and he was looking for help. You remember stuff like that. The look on his face, the cracks in his voice. And he was right. There had been trouble. I did not press him when he did not call me back to do this interview. When you watch the segment on the TV show, Tim talks about going on a search of the barn near the Eagles Lodge in 2007. Trained dogs followed Rene's scent, leading them to the abandoned structure. But nothing. Tim was told without a body, authorities wouldn't be able to prosecute. Rene's sister, Shawnee Hansen, lives in the Pacific Northwest. She says the family grew up there, and then Rene ventured to Missouri years ago.
We grew up in Oregon, and the father of her oldest son, his mother lived out in Missouri, and she ended up moving out there with Vince. And it was less than a year when they split up, and she met Tim.
Tim being Rene's boyfriend for 13 years and the father of her other 2 children. Shawnee says she liked him enough, didn't really know him very well since they lived so far away, but hey, Rene loved him. Shawnee says Rene and her were a year and a half apart, so growing up they were very close and remained close even though there was distance.
We talked probably once a week. We didn't see each other for long periods of time. We were long distance like that was a real hindrance, and neither of us had the money, for plane tickets and stuff back and forth for families. I have 3 kids also. Yeah, we talked all the time.
Their brother moved to Missouri, close to Rene. When you asked Shawnee about Rene?
Oh, she lit up a room, honestly. She loved attention, and she was real bubbly. We were the complete opposite.
Shawnee says the topic of safety at Rene's job came up during a few of their weekly calls.
I do remember her complaining that when she closed, there was always supposed to be a second person there for closing, and she was always having to close by herself, and she complained about that a few times to me. So I know she complained about it to other people also.
Shawnee says she first learned something was wrong that Wednesday when Rene didn't come home.
Yeah, Tim had called my brother because he didn't know how to deal with us, I guess, out here, my mom and myself. So my brother called and told me, and then I called Tim. Tim just told me what he knew, and my coworkers actually got me a plane ticket, and I flew out the next day.
Oh, that was very sweet of them.
It was. So it's on the record. Because her and Tim weren't married, they wouldn't let him make any decisions. So a lot of the stuff, the searching, there was a lady that raised police dogs, Belgian Malinois, out there, and she had asked the sheriff if she could use her dogs to search, and he told her no. The National Guard had called up and told them that they have, I think it was said 150 guys that they could help search, and the sheriff told them no. And when I got there on Friday, the lady with the dogs contacted me, and I was the closest next of kin, so I gave permission.
Shawnee says some of that delay, because Rene and Tim weren't married, it was frustrating.
13 years, and they wouldn't let Tim, answer or request anything or give approval for anything. Yeah, that was really frustrating. And then the sheriff at the time, he wasn't really interested. He told Tim and his brother that she was probably at a drug house. And they replied with, okay, you tell us where and we'll go kick the door in. And he didn't start the search until Saturday, I believe. When Friday night, when I got there, there was probably about 300 people at the Eagles that were doing the search on horses, on foot, by car, on four-wheelers. The sheriff showed up. I think it was more to calm the crowd than to do anything. I think it was the next day on Saturday when he finally brought in dogs from the prison in the next county.
Shawnee says after the search Friday night, she went right back to helping in the search for Rene the next morning.
Saturday, I had a rental car, so I spent the next 4 days, I just drove around and I handed out flyers. I went down into Arkansas. I did 2,500 miles on that car, just putting out flyers and truck stops. I can't believe how many truckers would stop and ask me for a handful of flyers to distribute.
She talks about going on the search with the dogs, the same one Tim was on, to an abandoned barn down the way from the Eagles Lodge.
Yes, I was with the lady, and they tracked her, sent into the barn. I just remember there was like some big, I think it's like what syrup and stuff like that comes in, big plastic bin things. But it didn't, the lady said it didn't leave from there. And she gave us reasons why. She said it was either because she was dead or she was probably more than likely wrapped up in something when she left there.
Next time on The Toll.
And you look into his eyes, and it's cold.
She bit the tip of his finger off, and he choked her to death. He didn't mean to kill her at that time, but she was fighting too hard.
Had no idea this guy could be a serial killer or, doing that type of stuff. You wouldn't have known it.
There were things that happened that night. I could see the wheels turning.
She sat there every day knowing what happened to my sister.
No doubt in my mind that we have the right guy.
The Toll Podcast, Unsettled, is a production of The Toll LLC. Co-creator and host, Nancy Simpson. Co-creator and executive producer, Jay Lashley. Technical producer and audio editor, Kat Morgan Gaines. Marketing manager, Pamela Shelby. Web design and digital creative director, Shelby Powers. Original music by Jay Lashley. Reproduction or use of any part of this broadcast without the expressed written permission of The Toll LLC is prohibited. You can see pictures related to Unsettled at thetollpodcast.com. If you enjoy The Toll, subscribe, rate, and share.